became Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Rachel Reeves has talked the talk about getting people off benefits, into work, and lowering the overall welfare bill. In her first interview in the job, she threatened we would be tougher than the Conservatives. But Labour has opposed just about every change the coalition has proposed to cut the cost and change the culture of welfare. Child benefit, housing benefit, the £26,000 benefit cap, Labour was against them all. They've been lukewarm about the government's flagship universal credit scheme, which rolls 6 benefit payments into one, and attacked the delays and problems. And Labour has set out only 2 modest welfare cuts. This week, Labour said young people must have skills or be in training if they want to claim benefits. That'll save £65 million, says Labour, though the cost of the extra training is unclear. And cutting winter fuel payments for richer pensioners would save around £100 million. Not a lot in a welfare bill of around £200 billion. And with welfare cuts popular even among Labour voters, they will soon have to start spelling out exactly what Labour welfare reform means. And Rachel Reeves joins me now. Welcome.
Hello, good morning.
Why do you want to be tougher than the Tories?
We want to be tough in getting down the welfare bill. Actually, under this government, welfare spending is going to be £13 billion more than the government set out in 2010. I don't think that's acceptable. We should be trying to control the costs of social security.
So you give a commitment
that
that the welfare bill under the next Labour government will fall. It will be smaller when you end the first Parliament than when you started.
Well, we've signed up to the cap in welfare. That doesn't see costs for social security fall,
no,
but it sees them go up in line with inflation or average earnings.
So welfare will rise?
Well, we've signed up to the government's cap on social security.
But I thought you were going to be tougher than the Tories.
We are going to get the costs of social security under control. They haven't managed to achieve that. As I said, the government is spending £13 billion more on social security. The reason they're doing that is because the minimum wage hasn't kept pace with the cost of living, so more people are relying on tax credits. They're not building housing, so more people are relying on housing benefit. We've got a record number of people on 0-hour contracts, so again having to rely on means-tested benefits.
Okay.
We need to get a grip on those
I'm still not clear if you're actually going to cut welfare if you get power. But I mean,
nobody is saying that the cost of welfare is going to fall.
All right.
The welfare cap sees the costs going up gradually. That's
a Tory cap.
Well, it's the cap that Ed
Which you've
Miliband
accepted.
called for.
So you're not being tougher than the Tories, you're being the same as the Tories.
Well, they haven't managed to achieve. If they had had a welfare cap in this Parliament, they would have breached it in every year of this Parliament.
Okay.
Because the fact is, social security is going to be higher than the government set out because they failed to get a grip.
I suggest to you that you read the polls, your party does lots of its own polling, and you're scared of being seen as the welfare party, aren't you? You don't really believe all this anti-welfare stuff.
Well, Labour are the party of work. We're not the party of welfare. The Labour Party was set up in the first place because we believe in the dignity of work, believe that everybody should be in work and that work should pay a wage that you can afford to live on. So I make no apologies for being the party of work. We're not the welfare party, we're the party of work.
But even your own confidential election strategy document, which was leaked this morning to the papers, it admits that voters don't trust you on immigration, the economy, this is your own people saying this, and welfare. You're not trusted on welfare.
Well, the most recent polls show Labour slightly ahead of the Conservative Party on social security, probably because they've seen all the incompetence and chaos at the Department for Work and Pensions under Ian Duncan-Smith and David
Cameron. Your own
Cameron.
internal party document admits that voters don't trust you on welfare reform.
Well,
because they don't think you mean it.
And which is why we have shown some of the tough things we're going to do, like, for example, the announcement that Ed made earlier this week, that young people without basic qualifications won't be entitled just to sign on for benefits. They've got to sign up for training in order to receive support. And that's the right thing to do by that group of young people, because they need skills to be able to progress.
Of course, and we'll come on to that.
It's also the right thing to do by taxpayers.
We're going to come on to that. Everything on this programme, when politicians speak to me, is the right thing to do. You say you would, you criticise the government if it's saying it had a cap, it wouldn't have met it. But you've voted against every money-saving welfare reform of the government. How is that being tougher than the Tories?
Well, the most recent vote that we had on welfare was on the overall cap on welfare expenditure. We went through the lobbies, voted with the Conservatives.
Yeah, but you voted against the means of housing benefit cap. You voted against 26,000 benefit cap. You voted against welfare uprating. You voted against child benefit savings.
You can't say that we've voted against everything. In the most recent vote we've had in Parliament, we voted with the Conservatives in favour of that cap on social security. So it's just not correct to say that we have voted against all the cuts on social security.
You voted.
The last time we voted, we walked through the lobby with them.
You voted on the principle of the cap. I understand that.
We voted on the cap.
But you voted against every single step that would allow that cap to be met. Well, every single one.
Well, the most recent vote in Parliament was not on the principle of a welfare cap. It was on a cap of social security in the next Parliament, and we signed up for that. In fact, it was Ed who called for that earlier on.
Which welfare reform did you vote for?
Well, we voted for that cap. And
so, other than the cap, what did you vote for?
Well, we have supported universal credit.
Well, you voted against that in the third reading.
Well, we voted against some of the specifics around what they're doing.
You voted against it.
Look at their universal credit. You know, they have had to write off already £90 million worth of expending.
I'm not on the rights and the wrongs. I'm trying to work out what you voted for at the moment. We'll come on to some of these issues.
Well, some of the things, Andrew, we're actually going to go further than the government. So, for example, cutting benefits for young people who don't sign up for training. The government haven't introduced that. For example, saying that the richest pensioners shouldn't get winter fuel allowance. That's something that the government haven't signed up to. So those are two cuts that you would get under Labour that this government haven't signed up for. 100 million on the winter fuel allowance, 65 million pounds on the on youth allowance.
Let's say you're right on 165 million. How big is the welfare budget?
Well, the cap would apply to about £120 billion worth
and you've managed to save 165
expenditure. Well, those are cuts that this government won't sign up to, that we have said that we would do if we were in government. But also, if you look at the real prize from the changes that Ed announced this week about the youth allowance, it's not the short-term savings, it's the fact that each one of these young people who are currently on unemployment benefits without the skills we know they need to succeed in life, they're going to cost the taxpayer £2,000 every single year during their working life.
I'm going to come on to this. I'm going to come on to that. I want, though, you mentioned universal credit, which of course is the government regards that as its flagship reform. It's had lots of troubles with it. It merges 6 different benefits into one. Now, as I said, you voted against it in the third reading. You've given lukewarm support to it in the past. You've not said you would abandon it. But now you say you'd pause it. Pause it. You're all over the place, aren't you?
Not at all. We set up a Universal Credit Rescue Committee in the autumn of last year because we'd seen from the National Audit Office, from the Public Accounts Committee, report after report showing that this project is massively over budget and it is not going to be delivered according to the government's timetable. So we set up this committee because we believe in the principle of universal credit. We think it's the right thing to do.
So why can't you tell us now if you're going to keep it or not?
Because there's no transparency. We've no idea.
But you have this committee that we're awash in information about it.
No, Andrew, we are not awash with information. No, because the government, in the most recent National Audit Office Major Projects Authority report, have said that this is now a brand new project. They can't even give it a status. They've said it's a reset project.
All right,
so well, not that information, Andrew. This is really, really important because this is a flagship government programme.
No, we've
said that. It's going to cost £12.8 billion to deliver, and we don't know what sort of state it's in. So we've said that if we win at the next election, then we will pause that for 3 months and call in the National Audit Office.
Will you stop the pilots?
We will. Well, no, the pilots, we don't even know what status they're going to be.
Well, will you stop the pilots?
No, but we would stop the build of the system for 3 months, call in the National Audit Office to do a warts and all report.
But you'd keep the pilots?
The government don't need to wait for the next general election. They could do this today. Call in the National Audit Office, stop throwing good money after bad, and finally get a grip of this incredibly important programme.
You said you don't know enough to give us a view now. So when you were invited to a job centre where universal credit is being rolled out to see how it was working, you refused to go. Why?
Well, we asked for a meeting with Ian Duncan-Smith. He cancelled those meetings 3 times. We wanted
No, I'm talking about the visit that you were offered to go to a job centre and you refused. Why?
No, we had an appointment to go and meet Ian Duncan-Smith at the Department for Work and Pensions. He cancelled that, said that he wasn't available, and instead he wanted us to go to the job centre. We wanted to go and talk to him and his officials, which we did last week.
Wouldn't it be more useful to go to a job centre and find out how the universal credit is working rather than Ian Duncan-Smith? He's going to tell you it's working fine. trying?
Well, we met the project director last week, and that was incredibly useful for us, although it throws up more questions.
Why didn't you go to the job centre and find out on the ground?
Tomorrow I'm going to the Citizens Advice Bureau in Hammersmith.
They don't administer universal credit.
No, but they are working with the pilots to help the people who are trying to claim universal credit. We're doing that tomorrow. But Ian Duncan-Smith cancelled 3 meetings with me and my shadow
another
ministers.
issue. I was asking
no, it's not,
about the job centre.
Andrew, it's not another issue, because we were due to go to a meeting with Ian Duncan-Smith that day.
You said that.
He said he wasn't available, and he fobbed us off with this visit.
Let's come on to the announcement this week. You said that jobless youngsters who won't take training would lose their welfare payments. Let's start with the scale of the problem. How many young people are not in work, training or education, the so-called NEETs?
There are 140,000 young people who are claiming benefits at the moment, but there are 850,000 young people who are not in work at the moment. But this applies to around 100,000.
Yeah, well, actually, let me
people.
just get the figures right. Yeah. There are actually 975,000 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in work, training or education. 975. Your proposal applies to only 100,000 of them.
Right.
Why?
This is about 18 to 21-year-olds who don't have the basic levels of skills that they need to get on. These are young people who are signing on. They're signing on for benefits rather than signing up for training. We want to ensure that all young people...
Why only 100,000?
Because they're the ones who are currently getting job seekers allowance. What we're saying to those young people is you can't just sign on for benefits. You have to sign up for training if you're going to get financial support.
But there are 975,000 people that need help. Now, can I just point out that the number, I'll get you to respond to this, the number of NEETs, these not in work, training or education, fell by 118,000 in the last year. That's more, a fall of more than you're planning to help.
Well, long-term youth unemployment is higher than when this government came to office. So we know that this is a huge problem. It's an entrenched problem that we need to address.
But youth unemployment is now falling by its fastest rate in 14 years.
But this issue about this entrenched group of young people, we saw in another report this morning from the TUC, young people who haven't got skills and aren't in training, we know are much less likely to get a job. So there are 140,000 18 to 21-year-olds signing on for benefits at the moment, but 70% of them don't have the basic levels of skills that we know they need to succeed. So this is about trying to address that problem to ensure that all young people have the skills they need to get a job.
Well, you
and that's
say
what
that,
this policy is all about.
Your policy is to take away the dole, or part of the dole, unless young unemployed people agree to study for level 3 qualifications. It's the equivalent of an AS level or an NVQ. But 40% of these people have the literary skills of a 9-year-old. 75% of them don't even have a bad GCSE in maths. After all that failed education, how are you going to train them up to A-level standard?
No, what we're saying is that anybody who doesn't have that A-level or equivalent vocational qualification will be required to go back to college. Now, we're not saying that they have to, within a year, get up to that level, but these are exactly the sorts of people with the poor levels of literacy.
These people need to be taught to read and
numeracy.
write, but they've been failed by your education system.
Well, Andrew, these people are, for the last 4 years, have been educated under a Conservative
most of them were 18
government.
to 21-year-olds. Most of them had most of their education under a Labour government, during which 300,000 people left with no GCEs whatsoever. These are the people you're now having to deal with. I don't understand how a year's training can do what 11 years in school didn't.
Andrew, well, let's be clear. We're not saying that within a year everybody's going to get up to a level 3 qualification. But if you are one of these people who enters the labour market aged 18 with the reading skills of a 9-year-old, those are exactly the sorts of people who shouldn't just be left languishing on unemployment benefits.
I understand
they need
that.
desperately to go back to college to try and get the skills. I went to a college in Hackney a few weeks ago, and there was this dyslexic lad, and he was studying painting and decorating. And at school, the teachers just assumed that, you know, he was just a bit of a troublemaker.
The school system failed him.
He didn't want to learn. He went back to college because he wanted to get the skills. And he said he used to carry the newspaper under his arm every day, but he couldn't read it. And it wasn't until he went back to college that he can now proudly pick up that newspaper and read it. It made a huge difference. But too many young people are let down by the system. They're allowed to continue on benefits rather than getting the training they need to succeed.
Well, I'm just wondering how the training is actually going to make up for an education system that failed them. But let's move on to your leader, who's very much in the news these days. Look at this graph of Ed Miliband's popularity. This is the net satisfaction with them. It's dreadful, isn't it? the trend is in continuous decline since he became leader of the Labour Party. Why?
Well, what you've seen since Ed became leader of the Labour Party is another 2,300 Labour councillors. You saw in the local elections just a month or so ago that if there had been a general election...
Why is his satisfaction rate
falling? Andrew, we can look at polls or we can look at actual election results. And the fact that we have got another 2,000 Labour councillors, more people voting Labour, the opinion polls today show that if there was a general election today, we'd have a majority of more than 40. Ed must be doing something right. I think he's doing a lot right.
If he's doing
because
something,
we're winning back those supporters who abandoned us in 2010.
Why do almost 50% of voters want to replace him as leader? Why do 50% and more think that he's not up to the job? I mean, the more people see Mr. Miliband, the less impressed. Look at that chart again. The less impressed they are. We don't get to like him more. We see him. The British people seem to like him less. I mean, the election strategy I would suggest that follows from that is that you should really keep Ed Miliband under wraps until the election.
Look, polls go up and down. You see different polls.
Go up and down,
but Andrew, but let's look at actually what happens when people get a chance to put a cross on a ballot paper. And when they get that opportunity, as I say, we've seen more Labour councillors, more Labour members of the European Parliament. We won that critical by-election in Corby. And the opinion polls just today, one shows Labour 4 points ahead, one 6 points ahead. That would give us a majority of more than 40.
Oppositions always win elections. You've not done that well in local government elections or in the European elections. Why don't people like him?
Andrew, I think we've done incredibly well in elections. Well, as I say, people must like a lot of the things that Labour and Ed are doing because we are winning back support across the country. We won local councils in places like Hammersmith and Fulham, in Crawley, in Hastings, in Amber Valley, in Calder Valley. Key places that Labour need to win back at the general election next year. We're getting back support.
Even you've said that traditional Labour voters are abandoning the party.
Well, that's what Ed said when he went to
That's what you said.
And that's what Ed has said as well.
Why?
We've got this real concern about what's happening. So if you look at the local and European elections back in May, 60% of people didn't even bother going to vote.
So
that is a real profound issue, not just for Labour, but for all political parties.
You said traditional voters, who perhaps at times we took for granted, are now being offered an alternative. Why did you take them for granted?
Well, this is what Ed said when he ran for the leadership.
You said it.
No, but Andrew, I'm not saying anything that Ed Miliband himself hasn't said. Ed, when he ran for the leadership, said that we took too many people for granted and that we needed to give people positive reasons to vote Labour. Ed has been doing that, which is why we've been winning back support.
But he's been there for 4 years and you're saying you still take them for granted. Why?
I said that there are people who we have for too long taken for granted. We're winning back that support. We're winning back support across the country. We're on track to win the general election next year. That will defy all the odds because what you've seen in the past is that a party loses a general election and then stays out of party for a generation.
You're going to
Ed's going to win next year and he's going to make a great Prime Minister.
Very well. Rachel Reeves, thank you.
Thank you.
Now to the Liberal Democrats at the